The sirens came first, then the blue lights flashing across my land. The cows froze, the horses stomped the dirt, and there I was, standing at my own gate, as the HOA president marched in with police at her side, smiling like she had already won. But what she didn't know was that I had been waiting for this moment all along, and when I showed them what I had hidden, everything changed in an instant. Welcome back to HOA Scandals, the channel where we uncover the darkest, pettiest, and most unbelievable HOA battles across America. My name is Daniel. I live on a family ranch right on the edge of a suburban neighborhood. 3 generations of blood and sweat built this land, and every day, I raise cattle, mend fences, and fight the dust storms of Texas. But lately, I've been fighting something much worse. An HOA that thought they owned me, my home, and even my land. This is the story of how they tried to take it all, and how I turned the tables instantly. I thought living on a ranch would mean peace, a simple life, where the only sounds were the wind through the grass and the cows calling in the distance. But peace is not something the HOA understands. They don't like peace. They like power. When my parents passed the land to me, I promised myself I would keep it the same way they built it. Strong fences, honest work, and freedom. But the neighborhood around us grew. More houses, more people. And then the HOA came. They started with little things, a letter about my fence color, a note about the size of my mailbox. At first I laughed. How could people who never touched dirt in their lives tell me how to live on a ranch? But soon, it wasn't funny anymore. One morning, I woke up to find a bold red sign nailed to my gate. Private property. Contact the homeowners association. I stood there with it, my coffee in hand, staring at it, feeling my blood boil, because this was my gate, my property, my family's land, and they had the nerve to mark it as theirs. I ripped the sign down. But the next day another one appeared, and then another. They wanted control, and they wanted me gone. Neighbors started acting strange too. People who used to wave from their porches now crossed the street when I came by. Some whispered that the HOA was planning to take legal action against me. One man even said, "They're calling you the problem neighbor." The problem neighbor. Me, the man who had lived here long before any of them. I tried to talk to the HOA president once. She showed up in her polished suit, with that cold smile that never reached her eyes. I told her politely, "This is my land. Your rules don't apply here." She looked me dead in the eye and said, "We'll see about that," and walked away as if she had already won. That was when the letters started, every week. Another envelope stuffed in my mailbox. Fines, warnings, threats of lawsuits. They said my barn roof was the wrong color. They said my animals were a violation of community standards. They even said the smell of my land was unacceptable, a ranch that had been here for decades. Suddenly a violation in their perfect little world. I wanted to ignore them. But they kept pushing, and soon, it wasn't just paper and letters. One evening, I came home to find 3 board members standing at my gate, clipboards in their hands, snapping pictures of my property. When I walked up, one of them smirked and said, "You need to leave." I looked at him and asked, "Or what?" He just smiled. "You'll see." And I did see. The very next week, that's when the cops showed up. I was feeding the horses when I noticed the flashing lights. The sirens weren't loud, but they were steady. Getting closer. Mike, stomach tightened, not out of fear, but out of anger. Because I knew this was the HOA's final move. The 2 officers stepped out of their car, uniforms sharp, expressions firm. Behind them, there she was, the president of the HOA, clipboard in hand, lips curled in a satisfied smile. She pointed at me like I was some kind of criminal. "On my own ranch," one officer said. "We got a call about a trespasser." I almost laughed. Trespasser. On my family's land. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. Instead, I told them to follow me to the house, because I had been waiting for this. All their threats, all their signs, all their smug little visits, I had been building my answer. On my kitchen table was a folder. Inside were deeds, maps, Proof that my ranch was never part of their HOA, that their rules stopped at the edge of my fence, and not an inch further. I grabbed it, walked back out, and handed it to the officers. The HOA president's smile started to fade. She didn't expect this. She thought I would panic, beg, maybe even leave quietly, but I didn't. I stood there, calm, watching her face change as the officers flipped through the papers. Every page made her smaller, weaker, until she wasn't smiling anymore. One officer looked at me, then at her, and said something I will never forget. "Ma'am, it looks like he's right." Her face turned pale. She tried to argue, pointing at the land, pointing at me. But it was over. She had lost, and in that moment, with the cops standing between us, I realized something. The HOA had no real power, not over me, because power only works if you let it. The officers left that day, but the memory of the HOA president's face still lingers in my mind. She wasn't used to losing, not in front of her board, not in front of the police, and definitely not in front of the neighborhood. I knew she wouldn't forgive me for embarrassing her like that. And I was right. The very next morning, another letter appeared in my mailbox. It wasn't about my barn or my animals. This one accused me of disturbing the peace. Apparently, the sound of my tractor at sunrise was now a violation. I almost laughed, because if the sound of hard work bothered them, then maybe they should never have moved near a ranch, but it wasn't funny for long. More letters followed, each one stranger than the last. They claimed the smell of hay was offensive. They said my fence was an eyesore. They even wrote that the shadow from my barn affected property values. It was absurd, every word. But it also told me something. The president wasn't just after me. She wanted to break me. I ignored the letters at first, but soon I noticed changes around me. The neighbors who used to wave now kept their blinds shut. When I walked down the street, conversation stopped. Even the kids who came to feed my horses once in a while were suddenly forbidden by their parents. The HOA was poisoning the whole neighborhood against me, and the president was the one holding the spoon. One evening, I saw her car parked just outside my ranch. She wasn't alone. 2 board members sat beside her. They were watching, waiting, scribbling notes on their clipboards, like hunters circling prey. I walked right up to her car. She rolled down the window slowly. That same fake smile stretched across her face. "Just doing our job," she said. I leaned down, looked her dead in the eye, and replied, "This isn't your job. This is harassment." She didn't flinch. She just whispered back, "We'll see." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind through the trees, I thought it was them. I started to realize this wasn't just about land anymore. It was about control. And people who crave control will never stop until they take everything. Days turned into weeks. The HOA president doubled her efforts. I got calls from anonymous neighbors reporting me for noise, for smells, even for suspicious activity. Imagine that. A man on his own land, accused of being suspicious for feeding his own animals. I started to keep a journal. Every letter, every visit, every word she said to me, I wrote it all down because I knew this battle was only getting started. And then, something strange happened. I received an invitation, not a warning, not a fine, but a letter inviting me to the next HOA meeting. They said they wanted to discuss the future of the community. I almost tore it up, but something inside me whispered, "Go," so I did. The meeting was held in the community center, a sterile little room with folding chairs and fluorescent lights. The president stood at the front, her clipboard in hand, her smile sharper than ever. As soon as I walked in, the room fell silent. Every eye turned to me, some filled with curiosity, others with suspicion. I sat down in the back row, arms crossed, waiting. The meeting dragged on about lawn heights and mailbox colors, petty rules that made no sense to me. But I noticed something. Every decision, every vote, every word was controlled by the president. She didn't just lead the board, she ruled them and the neighbors. They followed her blindly until it was my turn. The president cleared her throat and announced, "We must address the issue of Mr. Daniels' ranch." Gasps filled the room. Whispers bounced off the walls. She pointed at me, accusing me of lowering property values, of being a nuisance, of damaging the spirit of the neighborhood. I stood slowly, let the silence stretch, then spoke. My ranch has been here long before this neighborhood existed, long before this HOA was even born. My voice was calm, steady, but every word cut through the room. This land is mine. It always has been, and it will not bend to your rules. For a moment, no one spoke, and then she laughed, a cold, sharp laugh that echoed off the walls. "Then we will see you in court," she said, and just like that, the meeting was over. I walked out of that room knowing the battle lines were drawn. It wasn't about letters or signs anymore. It was going to be a war. The weeks after the meeting were worse than ever. Anonymous complaints turned into visits from inspectors. The HOA called animal control on me, claiming my horses were neglected. They called the county about unsafe structures on my land. Each time, I showed the inspectors my papers, my records, my proof. Each time, I was cleared, but each visit left me more exhausted, more frustrated, more determined. And then came the breaking point. One morning, I woke up to find my front gate chained shut, not by me. Someone had come in the night and locked it with heavy steel chains. My cattle couldn't be fed. My truck couldn't leave. I was trapped. I knew exactly who was behind it. The HOA president had finally crossed the line. I called the sheriff. When he arrived, I showed him the chains, the signs, the letters. He listened carefully, then shook his head. "This isn't the first time I've heard complaints about her," he said, "but this is criminal." He cut the chains himself, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the pile of letters. The HOA wanted war, and I was ready to give it to them, but I wouldn't fight with anger. I would fight with their own rules. Every absurd demand, every petty violation, every piece of their bylaws, I would study them, learn them, and turn them back against them, because sometimes the best revenge is compliance. I started reading their rulebook that night, page after page of nonsense about grass length, mailbox paint, fence height. It was laughable, but also powerful, because every line was a weapon. And for the first time, I realized I could use it against them. I stayed up late, highlighting, marking notes. I memorized the codes, the punishments, the contradictions, because the thing about people who love control is that they're often sloppy with their own rules, and I was going to make sure every slip would cost them. The first thing I noticed was their obsession with lawns. Grass had to be cut to a certain height, not an inch longer, not an inch shorter. So one morning, I drove through the neighborhood. I looked carefully at every yard, every house, every blade of grass. And what did I find? Half the neighborhood was out of compliance. The president's own lawn, the one she bragged about, had patches above the limit. I took pictures, clear, detailed, undeniable evidence. And then, I sent it right back to them in a formal complaint. Not from me directly, but from a concerned resident. I knew the rulebook better than they did now, and I used their exact words. A week later, she got her own violation letter. The look on her face when she stormed past my ranch was priceless. For once, she was the one being judged. But I didn't stop there. Their bylaws said every mailbox had to be painted neutral tones. So I drove the neighborhood again and found bright blues, greens, even a neon yellow, more pictures, more reports, more complaints filed through their own system. I buried them in paperwork, the same way they had tried to bury me. The HOA board started cracking. At the next meeting, neighbors argued with each other. Why am I being fined for my mailbox when his is worse? Why are you ignoring your own lawn? The president tried to keep order, but the seeds of doubt were planted. People were beginning to see her for what she was: petty, hypocritical, drunk on power. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just kept following their rules. Every single one. When they said my fence was too high, I measured it, adjusted it, and proved them wrong. When they said my barn roof was the wrong color, I repainted it with the exact shade in their guidelines. They couldn't touch me anymore. Not legally. And with every step I took, okay, they looked weaker, But the president wasn't done. She called another special meeting. This time, she wanted to push a new amendment, one that would give the HOA direct authority over border properties. Land like mine, she wanted to change the rules to take me in. I sat in that meeting, listening as she tried to sell her idea with that sharp smile of hers. But I wasn't alone anymore. Neighbors who had once avoided me now whispered in my favor. They were tired of the fines, tired of the double standards. One man stood up and said, "If Daniel's ranch has been here longer than us, why should he answer to the HOA?" Others nodded. Murmurs spread. The president's face tightened. Her control was slipping. She pushed for a vote anyway. But when the ballots came in, her amendment failed. For the first time, she had lost publicly, and the boardroom felt different that night. Not her kingdom anymore, but a battlefield she could no longer control. After the meeting, she confronted me outside. Her voice was low, sharp. "You think you've won, but this isn't over." I looked at her, calm, steady, and replied, "No, it's just beginning." Because while she wasted her energy trying to destroy me, I had been preparing something bigger. Remember all those letters, all those threats, all those false reports? I had kept every single one, a thick folder of harassment, intimidation, and abuse of power. And now, I was ready to take it higher. I contacted a lawyer, someone who specialized in HOA abuse. When I handed him the folder, his eyebrows shot up. "This is enough to bury them," he said, for the first time in months. I felt real hope, but I didn't rush. I let the HOA keep digging their hole. They fined a widow down the street for leaving her trash cans out too long. They threatened a single mom for having a swing set in her backyard. The neighborhood grew restless, angry, tired of living under a microscope. Whispers turned into complaints. Complaints turned into open rebellion. And me, I just kept watching. Because I knew the day was coming when the president would push too far. That day arrived faster than I thought. One morning, the sheriff's truck pulled into my driveway again. I thought it was another false complaint, but this time, he came with a smile. He handed me a document, official and stamped. It was notice of a lawsuit, but not against me, against the HOA. The lawyer I had contacted had filed the case. Harassment, abuse, trespassing, even defamation. And my neighbors, they joined in. People lined up to give testimony. Stories of unfair fines, threats, humiliation. The very community the president thought she controlled was now standing against her. The trial was brutal, week after week. The HOA tried to defend itself. The president tried to twist the story, paint me as the villain. But every time she opened her mouth, another neighbor contradicted her. And then came my folder, the thick stack of evidence I had saved, letters, threats, photos, reports, all of it laid out before the judge. When I finished speaking, the courtroom was silent. Even the president couldn't hide her fear anymore. Her smile was gone. Her hands trembled on the table, because she knew it was over. The ruling came swift. The HOA was found guilty of harassment and abuse of authority. They were ordered to pay damages, not just to me, but to every neighbor they had wronged. The president was removed from her position immediately. Her reign, her petty little empire, collapsed in an instant. I walked out of that courtroom with my head high, not because I hated them, but because I had proven something important, that even the strongest bully crumbles when the truth is louder than their lies. And as I looked back at my ranch that evening, the land glowing in the sunset, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace, real peace. When the court ruling came down, I thought, audit was over. The HOA had been stripped of power. Neighbors were free again. And my ranch stood tall just like it always had. For the first time in months, I slept peacefully. No letters, no fines, no clipboards at my gate. Just the sound of the wind through the fields and the steady rhythm of my animals at dawn. But peace never lasts long. Not when you've made an enemy who refuses to lose. The former president disappeared for a while. No board meetings, no smug visits, no polished suits showing up on my road. Neighbors said she sold her house. Others said she was hiding out with family. I didn't care. I was just glad she was gone, until the strange things started happening. It began small, a broken fence post at the far edge of my property. I thought it was the wind, or maybe the cattle pushing against it, but then I found the cut marks, clean, sharp, from a blade. Someone had done it on purpose. A week later, I woke up to find my mailbox ripped from the ground, not kicked, not bent, ripped completely out. Bolts scattered across the dirt, like someone wanted to send a message. And deep down, I knew exactly who that someone was. Still, I told myself to let it go. Maybe it was kids. Maybe just random vandalism. But denial only works for so long. One night, I was closing up the barn when I noticed headlights at the far end of the road. Not moving. Just sitting there. The car didn't belong to anyone I knew. Too sleek. Too polished for a country road. It sat there for nearly half an hour, and when I finally walked down toward it, it sped off into the dark. That's when the whispers started again. Neighbors told me they'd seen her, not at meetings, not in public, but driving slowly through the neighborhood, watching, waiting. The woman who had lost her crown still wanted a war. I decided to tighten security. New locks on the gates, cameras mounted near the barn and the house. I wasn't going to let her sneak into my land again. But the thing about people like her, they don't give up easy. One evening, the sheriff himself stopped by. He held a report in his hand, and his expression was serious. "Daniel," he said, "you might want to sit down for this." I felt my stomach twist as he explained. Someone had filed an anonymous complaint against me, not the HOA this time, but an individual. The report claimed I was running illegal activity on my ranch, that my barn was being used for suspicious gatherings. I almost laughed. Me, a man who spent his nights fixing fences and feeding cattle, but the sheriff wasn't laughing. He told me they had to investigate, so they did. Deputies walked through my barn, my fields, my sheds. Of course they found nothing, but the message was clear. She was trying to use the law against me again. I wanted to be angry, but instead, I felt something colder, pity, because she had lost everything, and now all she had left was bitterness. But the games didn't stop. A week later, one of my cows turned up sick, not from disease, but from something in the feed. The vet confirmed it. Traces of poison. I felt rage burn inside me like never before. Mess with me all you want, but harm my animals, and you cross a line you can't come back from. I called the sheriff again, told him everything. The fence, the mailbox, the car at night, the false report, and now, the poisoned feed. He listened, his jaw tight. Finally he said, "Daniel, I think it's time we put someone on her." For days, I saw a patrol car parked near the edge of my land, watching, waiting, just like she had done. And sure enough, it didn't take long. One night, around midnight, headlights appeared again. This time, the car didn't drive away. It slowed, stopped near my gate. The deputies followed quietly, and caught her red-handed, the former HOA president, crouched at my fence line. Bolt cutters in hand, she was arrested on the spot. Trespassing, destruction of property, suspected animal, cruelty. When I heard the news, I didn't feel joy, I didn't feel triumph. I felt something I never expected. Sadness. Because this was a woman who once ruled a neighborhood with nothing more than a smile and a clipboard. And now, she was reduced to sneaking through the dark with bolt cutters. That's what power does to people. It blinds them. And when it's gone, they'll do anything to get it back. The neighborhood was quiet for weeks after her arrest. People talked about it in hushed tones. Some defended her, said she was under stress, said the lawsuit ruined her. Others said she got exactly what she deserved. Me, I just kept working my land, because no matter what they said, I knew the truth. She had chosen this path, step by step, until it led her to handcuffs. But deep down, I wondered, was it really over, or would she find another way to come back at me? Because people like her don't vanish. They linger, they plot, they wait for the right moment. And though the sheriff assured me she'd be facing charges, I couldn't shake the feeling that this battle wasn't finished yet. At night, when I sit on my porch and look across the quiet fields, I still think about it. The flashing lights, the false reports, the poisoned feed. I wonder if she lies awake too, thinking about me, thinking about what she lost, and if one day she'll come back again. After her arrest, things were supposed to calm down. At least that's what I told myself. The HOA was gone. The president was gone. The lawsuit was over, but peace doesn't return that easy. Not after months of battles, threats, and poisoned feed. The neighborhood was different now, quieter on the surface, but tense underneath. When I walked down the street, people still looked away. Some waved, some smiled politely, but most just stared from behind their curtains. I wasn't the villain anymore, but I wasn't the hero either. I was something else, a reminder of the war that tore their little kingdom apart. And then the notes began. It started with one, left under the windshield of my truck at the grocery store, in neat handwriting, black ink, no signature. Everyone would be happier if you left. I crumpled it up and tossed it aside, but a few days later, another appeared, this time in my mailbox. You don't belong here. At first I thought it was just her, the former president still trying to get inside my head, but the handwriting changed. Different strokes, different pens, different people. And that's when I realized this wasn't just her anymore. It was the neighbors. They had learned from her. They had watched her. And now they were carrying her fight in their own way. I started to notice little things. Trash bags tossed over my fence in the night, deep scratches on the side of my truck, a pile of broken glass spread across my driveway. Small acts, petty acts, but all with the same message. You are not welcome. I didn't complain. I didn't call the sheriff. I just watched. Because sometimes, silence is the best weapon, but the silence didn't last long. One evening, I walked out to the barn and found another note pinned to the door. This one wasn't neat like the others. The handwriting was rushed, angry, carved deep into the paper. Leave before something happens. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. This wasn't petty anymore. This was a threat. I installed more cameras, more lights. Every corner of my ranch watched and guarded, and still, the games continued. Late at night, I would hear footsteps near the fence. When I went out with a flashlight, there was nothing but trampled grass. Some mornings, my animals would be restless, spooked, as if someone had been there. It wasn't just vandalism anymore. It was psychological. They wanted me to feel hunted, and I'll admit, sometimes it worked. I would lie awake in bed, listening to the house settle, wondering if every creak was a person. On the porch, I would see shadows in the tree line, flickers of movement just out of sight. Maybe it was paranoia, maybe not, but either way, they were winning the war in my head. Until I decided to turn it around, I started documenting everything again. Not just letters and notes, but sounds, times, movements. Every night I logged what I saw, what I heard, because fear loses its power when you put it on paper, and slowly, I began to see patterns. The footsteps always came on Fridays. The notes always appeared on Tuesdays. The vandalism happened late at night, never during the day. Whoever was behind it wasn't random. It was planned, methodical, almost like a schedule. So I set a trap. One Friday night, I left the lights off, no cameras visible, no signs of watching. But in reality, I was waiting in the shadows with a clear view of the fence. And sure enough, just after midnight, I saw a figure creeping along the fence line. Not the president, someone else. A man from down the street. One of the board members who used to back her every decision. He was dragging something behind him, a bag of trash. I watched as he dumped it over my fence, laughing quietly to himself, and in that moment, I understood. This wasn't about me anymore. This was about loyalty to her. Even after she was gone, the next morning, I didn't confront him. I didn't shout. Instead, I filed a complaint using their own system. The HOA was dead. But the county still had codes, and I knew them better than anyone now. Within a week, he got fined for improper waste disposal. The irony tasted sweet, but the war didn't stop there. Another neighbor started blasting music at odd hours, always when my animals were feeding. Another parked their car halfway across my driveway, blocking my truck, each time. I didn't fight with anger. I fought with their own rules, their own systems. And it slowly, one by one. They turned on each other, because when you live in fear of rules, the smallest violation can ruin you. The neighborhood became a battlefield of whispers and complaints. Notes spread from mailbox to mailbox. Fines piled up. Friendships broke apart. And all I had to do was sit back and watch. It was never me against them anymore. It was them against each other, and in the middle of it all, I found peace again. Not because they liked me, not because they accepted me, but because they were too busy tearing themselves apart to bother me anymore. But still, late at night, when the wind howls through the fields, I think about her, the former president, the woman who started it all. I wonder if she sits somewhere, watching the chaos she created, if she smiles knowing that even in her absence, her shadow still controls them, and I wonder, how long before that shadow comes back? For weeks, the neighborhood tore itself apart. Notes in mailboxes, calls to inspectors, neighbors spying on neighbors, the very tools they once used against me, they now used against each other. And I thought maybe, just maybe, I was finally free. But freedom is never that simple. Not when your enemy isn't gone. Only hiding. One evening, I came home late from town. The sun had already dipped low, painting the sky in deep red streaks. I turned into my driveway. And that's when I saw it. A car parked near my gate. Not a neighbor's car, not a county vehicle, sleek, black, with tinted windows. For a moment I froze. My heart raced. Because I knew that car, it was hers. The former president had returned. She didn't step out right away. She just sat there, staring through the windshield. I could feel her eyes, even though I couldn't see them. Finally, the door opened. She stepped out, calm, collected, like she had never been arrested, never been disgraced. The same polished suit, the same sharp smile, but something in her eyes was different now, harder, colder. "Daniel," she said, her voice smooth like glass. "I see you've been busy." I did. And answer, I just stood there, arms crossed, waiting, because I wanted to hear what game she was playing now. She walked closer, slow, deliberate, her heels crunching against the gravel. "You think you've won," she said, "but this isn't over, not by a long shot." I almost laughed. "Last I checked," I told her, "the HOA is gone, your board is gone, your power is gone." But she only smiled wider. "That's the thing about power," she whispered. "It never really disappears. It just finds new ways to work." And then, without another word, she slipped back into her car and drove off into the night. I stood there for a long time after she left, her words echoing in my head. Power never disappears. It just changes form. The days after her return grew strange, not violent, not direct, but strange. I'd find fresh footprints near my barn. Though my cameras caught nothing, tools from my shed would go missing, only to reappear days later in the exact same spot. Lights in the neighborhood flickered at odd hours, and every time I thought I saw her car in the distance, it vanished before I could get close. It wasn't vandalism anymore. It was something else, psychological. She wasn't trying to break my land. She was trying to break my mind. Neighbors noticed too. Some whispered that she was back, watching from the shadows. Others swore they saw her walking the cul-de-sac late at night. No car, just her silhouette under the streetlights. It became a story, a rumor, almost like a ghost haunting the neighborhood. But I knew better. She wasn't a ghost. She was flesh and blood, and she still wanted to win. So I decided to watch her, the same way she watched me. I started keeping track of every sighting, every time someone saw her car, every time lights flickered, every strange movement in the night, and slowly, a pattern began to emerge. Always late. Always quiet. Always just enough to be noticed, but never enough to be caught. It was a game, a sick game of presence and absence. She wanted me to know she was there, but never close enough to touch. And it worked. Some nights I couldn't sleep. I'd sit on the porch with the shotgun across my lap, waiting, listening. The silence stretched thin like glass, ready to shatter with the smallest sound. Then one night, it did shatter. I woke up to the sound of footsteps inside my house. Not outside, not at the fence. Inside, my heart slammed against my chest as I grabbed the shotgun and crept down the hall. The air felt heavy, electric, as I moved toward the living room. And there, on the coffee table, I saw it. A single sheet of paper. No forced entry. No broken locks. Just that paper, and written in the same neat handwriting I remembered from her HOA letters, was one sentence. "You don't control the story, I do." My hands shook as I read it. She had been in my home while I slept. While I thought I was safe, I called the sheriff immediately when he arrived. He checked every window, every door. No signs of a break-in, but the paper was real. The handwriting was real, and the fear was real. He promised he'd look into it, but I could see it in his eyes. He thought I was paranoid, maybe even imagining it. And that's exactly what she wanted. She wasn't fighting me with laws or fines anymore. She was fighting me with fear. I tried to carry on like normal, feeding the animals, fixing the fences, keeping to my work. But every sound, every shadow, felt like her. I would find myself staring at the tree line for minutes at a time, convinced she was standing there. I'd catch glimpses of movement in the mirrors of my truck. Always gone when I turned. It was driving me mad, and maybe that was her real plan all along. But here's the thing. Fear can break you, or it can fuel you, and I wasn't about to let her win again. I started preparing extra locks, reinforced doors, backup generators in case the lights went out. Neighbors thought I was going too far. They didn't know her like I did. They hadn't seen the way she smiled while she tried to destroy lives. The night she broke into my house proved one thing. She wasn't done. Not yet. And deep down, I knew the final battle was coming. Not in court, not at a meeting, not with papers and clipboards, but face to face, one last time. After the night I found that note on my coffee table, sleep became impossible. Every creak in the floorboards, every rustle of the trees, felt like her footsteps returning. I locked every door, checked every camera. But deep down I knew, locks don't stop obsession. The former HOA president was no longer a board member. She was no longer even part of the neighborhood. But her shadow stretched over everything. She had turned from a petty tyrant into something darker, something personal. I tried to carry on with life. The ranch demanded it. The cattle still needed feed. The fences still needed repair. The land still needed care. But every time I bent down to fix a post, I felt eyes on me. Every time I turned to shut the barn door, I imagined her silhouette in the distance. And then, the notes returned. One appeared under my pillow. I swear, I had checked the house before I went to sleep. But in the morning, there it was, written in the same perfect handwriting. "You will never be free of me." Another note was tied to the leg of one of my horses, a ribbon knotted tight, with words carved into the paper. "This land is mine." I felt anger burn hotter than fear, because this wasn't just about me anymore. She was touching my animals, my family's land, my bloodline, and that crossed a line no one could ever cross. I contacted the sheriff again. He listened carefully, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. There were no fingerprints, no footage, no evidence that would hold in court. "She's playing a game," he said quietly, and I knew he was right. But games can end, and I was ready to end this one. So I made a decision. If she wanted me broken, I would show her strength instead. If she wanted me scared, I would face her head on. I set my plan in motion. For 3 nights I left the barn doors unlocked, the lights dim, the cameras angled toward the entrance. I wanted her to think I was careless, distracted, weak, because I knew she wouldn't be able to resist. She needed to prove she still had power, and that need would bring her straight to me. The 4th night. It happened, just after midnight. I heard the barn doors creak open. I stayed silent, waiting in the shadows. Through the crack of the window I saw her, the ex-president herself, dressed in black, moving slow, careful. Her eyes darted around the barn as if she owned it, and in her hand, she carried bolt cutters. My heart pounded, but not with fear, with rage. I stepped out from the shadows, my boots heavy against the dirt. She froze, her body stiff, her head snapping toward me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she smiled, that same sharp smile I had seen 100 times before. "You can't get rid of me," she whispered. "This place belongs to me now." I raised my voice, calm but steady. "No, it never did, and it never will." She laughed, a cold sound that echoed against the barn walls. You think the law saved you. You think your little papers mean anything. But I can always come back. I can always take what I want. That was when the sheriff's truck lights flooded the barn. I had called him earlier, told him everything, asked him to trust me, and he had. He had been waiting nearby all night. The moment the lights hit her, her smile shattered. She dropped the bolt cutters, tried to run, but the deputies were faster. They pinned her to the ground as she screamed, cursed, shouted about power and ownership, but her words meant nothing anymore, because this time she was caught red-handed. They took her away in handcuffs, just like before, but this time there would be no release, trespassing, eking and entering, harassment, stalking. The list of charges stretched longer than her clipboard ever had as the patrol cars disappeared into the night. I stood in the silence of my barn, breathing heavy, heart still pounding, but for the first time in months, the fear was gone because I had faced her, and I had won. The neighborhood changed after that night. People stopped whispering, some apologized. Others avoided me still, but the shadow was gone, the fear was gone, and my ranch, my family's land, finally stood free again. I sat on my porch the next morning, watching the sunrise spill across the fields. The cattle grazed calmly. The horses moved slow and steady, and for the first time, the world felt peaceful. I had fought the HOA, the board, the president, and even her ghost of obsession, and somehow, I had survived. But peace has its own silence, and sometimes, silence can be louder than noise. Because even now, even with her locked away, I still wonder, how far would someone go when power is taken from them? How far would they fall before they stop fighting?